Welcome, Jeanette Young. The Cambridge Narrows Community School thanks you for participating in our Legacy of History project. Can you tell?
I was born in Baghdad and then moved to Pickett's Cove. Okay. My parents' name was Campbell's, and my mother came from Ireland, over in the boat with her brothers and sisters.
Can you tell me what your father did for a living?
At first, when we were small, he had to go away to the woods to work, and in the wintertime, and then he got to working as a millwright, and eventually he had his own sawmill and was at home and done some farming and had some cattle.
Do you have any childhood memories?
Yes, we always had skating parties and bonfires on the Washtemoik, and then in the summer the Majestic boat would come up, and they would have different times when they would take, and people would be on the boat, and it was very nice to hear them sing and play music as they went up and down the river.
Where did you go to school? What was it like?
I went to a small school with 8 grades, and it was called the Washtemoik School. And after you got your 8 years in there, you had to write a entrance to go to the Coles Island High School. And when I got there, there was 2, it was divided. There was so many grades to grade 8, and then 9, 10. And the next year after I left there, they were putting another year on the school. Instead of being 10 years, it was 11 years before you graduated. And that's when I left school. I was born in 1933 and started to school in 1938.
What was it like growing up in the early 40s?
Well, we had no hydro, and had to get the water out of the well, and if you had anything that was perishable, it would have to go in the basement where it was cool. And as time grew on, we did get our hydro, and that was a blessing. We had lights in the house and in the barn, but before we had oil lamps, and there was a lantern that my father would take to the barn to feed the cattle, and that was one of my jobs, was to keep that lantern shade cleaned.
What were the changes when you got electricity?
Well, at that time we were able to have lights and have power in the house and water in the house, and was able to, get a stove and have electric stove, and the best blessing was to have electric lights from different rooms to rooms. And I guess that was the bulk of it. Another change that we was very good, that we had fridge, and the cream and stuff and the milk and our perishable things could stay in the fridge.
Where did you go shopping for your groceries and clothes?
Well, mostly we went to Sussex. That was the handiest place to get things. And my mother made mostly all our clothes, dresses and things, and we'd get the material in Baird's in Sussex. And yarn, we bought yarn there. Mother made our knit socks for us, and She would make dresses for us girls. And there was a lady up the road that was very talented in making clothes. So if we saw something in the catalog that we would like to have a dress like, she would get me or my sister Mark to go with my father when he got the mail, get off at Mrs. Stevens's, that was her name, and she would take that picture and cut Mum out a pattern on a piece of newspaper. Then it would be brought home and she would have me a dress in no time.
How was mail delivered to your home?
My father drove mail from Pickett's Cove to Cold Sound, and the Cold Sound post office was in my uncle's store. And he would go in the morning and take the mail up and have it sorted and bring it back. And there was a long space there. There were 7 miles. And if anybody needed something particular from the store, they would put a note in the mailbag, and my father would deliver those articles to him on his way back.
I understand that you were married. Where did you meet your husband? What was his name?
We used to have dances at Cambridge Narrows in Orange Hall, and every Saturday night, or pretty near every Saturday night, I would be going to the dances. So there was this nice-looking gentleman asked me home one night, and that was the start of our marriage. And then we were married in about a year after that. And my husband's name was Manfred Young.
Where did you live after you got married?
My husband had a house that he had in Gemsag, and when we got married, we moved in there. And we've been there 53 years.
What did you and your husband do for a living?
Well, when he drove mail, too, from Gemsag Post Office to the Cody's Post Office. And then when that was done, he gradually worked into trucking. And as we grew with some things around us, he was in the trucking business, and then we started farming. And we grew different vegetables and had cattle, and I was right at his side. I worked outdoors and brought up the 5 children. I worked with him out in the fields, and the children, they had their chores to do. We grew potatoes and vegetables, and berries was our biggest crop. So when he would be away on the interval, cutting hay in the fall of the year, and summer and fall, I would have the milking to do and feed the calves. And the children, when they come home from school, they all had their chores. The boys went to the barn, and the girls helped me in the house.
What were the names of your children, and what did they do on the farm?
Raymond was the oldest, and Barb, and Doreen, Gordon, and June. The boys had their duties to do at the barn, like feeding hay and feeding the feed, and then fill the wood box and carry in wood, and the girls helped me with the dishes and cleaning up around the house. And eventually they started to cook and make the cakes, and sometimes pack their own lunches. And I had 2 daughters who were very interested in sewing and knitting, and They made quilts, and we had a quilt fair in Lower Gemsag, and that was a highlight of the spring, because everybody thought that they would get quilts made to put in this fair. And to this day, Barb, my oldest daughter, is still involved in quilting, and so is Doreen. And knitting. And the younger daughter, she didn't take that to that as well as the other two. And she went, after school, she went out and done restaurant work. Okay, we go back to 1966 for John Gibson and Son Limited in Fredericton. My husband would get the dairy ration there, and 40 bags at that time cost $444. No, all right. And I used to buy domestic shortening in the 20-pound pail, and it was $7.14. 2 pounds of prunes was 78 cents. And Velveeta cheese, the big blocks of Velveeta cheese, was $1.38. And 5 pounds of oatmeal was 69 cents. A gallon of molasses was $1.53. And white raisins at that time for making my Christmas cake was $1.53.
When did you get married?
In 1951 at the United Church in Young's Cove. My bridesmaid was my husband's sister, Isabel Mead, and the best man was Bert Campbell, being my uncle. In the winter when the snow was deep, and my father took his little sleigh and he built around it so he would be covered too, driving the mail. But he would also pick us children up along the way and take us and drop us off at school. And his return with the mail, we would have to get out a little bit early to get a drive back home with him.
Can you tell me about your first job?
Well, the first job after school, I would go picking strawberries in the summer down to Blake Ham's in Waterboro. And you would pick all day, and you would have to carry your own berries out. Nowadays, on the farm that we run now, there would be somebody to pick your boxes up. So to keep things straight, you had to take 10 boxes with you, empty. And when they were full, you carried them back out and put them in the crate. And at that time, the crates held 32 boxes. But today, they only hold 15. And when I'd go home, you would just get a cent a box. And you'd usually get 100 boxes if you were a good picker. So I would come home with about $30 in my hand, which was a lot of money at that time. And that went to pay for my clothes to go to school or go to work. Then, as time went on and the strawberry business increased, we had acres of them. And we had this family from the Narrows, the McGarity family. They came every year. There'd be Bill McGarity and his mother and his family, and then eventually the grandchildren. And they were a wonderful help to us. And right across from the strawberry field, there was an irrigation pond. And when they got through their day's work, you would see them all head for the pond and have a swim before they went home.
Did you do any traveling in your years?
Not in my younger years because I was too involved with the farm. But later on, when the children got bigger and older and could take over some of the work, a friend of mine and I went to Nashville, and that was a very enjoyable trip. Hilda Cowell was her name. And then another year we went to Niagara Falls, and we were gone 10 days and visited all around there. And that's about as far as we went.
How was transportation back then?
Well, when I was living at home with my parents, my dad had an old Model T Ford, and it took us around. And I remember in the winter you would put isinglass where there would be no regular glass, and they'd put these panels in to keep the snow and the rain out. And then when we moved on the farm, we used the horses and eventually got tractors. And my husband usually always bought a half-ton truck, and that was our transportation. The children at that time could sit on back, but today you're not allowed. And then the little ones and I would be in the cab. A good many nights, Saturday nights, we would all get ready and go to St. John. My husband was a great one to tend the horse races in St. John.
Can you tell me about your grandchildren?
Yes. I have a set of twins, a boy and a girl, and another girl. That was my daughter Barb. And Raymond has two girls, and they're both being married this year. And they're both husbands are from Moncton. And then I have Gordon had two, a boy and a girl. And June had one.
Jeanette Young, we would like to thank you for participating in a Legacy of History project. We so much appreciate your stories you have shared with us.